It's been called the best album the Pixies never made, a cerebral pop masterpiece and the defining statement of his solo career. The record is Teenager of the Year, the second solo album by Frank Black, aka Black Francis of Pixies, aka Charles Thompson IV. And as it hits its 30th anniversary this year, Charles has announced a reissue of the album and a tour of playing the album in full in the US and the UK in January and February next year with the same band that recorded it. I'm Mark Beaumont and welcome to the Teenager of the Year podcast, where Charles will be discussing the making and meaning of the album from the teenage memories that inspired it to its most fascinating topics and themes, be they missing Mars probes, the Three Stooges, or mythical societies of vengeful undersea creatures. Hi Charles.
Hi Mark, nice to see you.
How are you doing?
Very good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to revisit this record. I mean, obviously it's the 30-year anniversary is a very big deal. But what was it particularly that drew you back to wanting to tour the record and revisit it so deeply?
Well, a subject came up at the 20-year anniversary, and I believe most of the band or myself we were all busy at that time, and so it wasn't a big priority for anybody. So we kind of, everyone passed on the idea. We just couldn't get it together. We liked the idea. And then the 30th anniversary was approaching, and someone mentioned it, and by coincidence, some of the musicians had already been working together at someone else's session and kind of had noted, oh, it's 30 years, we should do something to see if Charles wants to do something or whatever. And by coincidence, I had already been in discussion with whoever had suggested it to me, you know. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, when we all finally, caught up on emails and phone texts or whatever, everyone was like, oh, we're all in, so let's do it. And because I don't know, I mean, I'd love to be able to do the 40th as well, but we don't want to be that presumptuous, I suppose, that we're all going to be fit as a fiddle at the 40th anniversary and still in the touring business or whatever. So we thought, well, we better do it if we're going to do it.
Does it feel like an important record for your solo career?
Yeah, it's definitely the one that seems to have assumed the kind of ultimate station, among all of the records. And I can't say for any particular, not by design, of course, these things just kind of happen. Certainly by design, I would say it was probably the most, I don't know if it was the most reckless recording session I've ever done, but certainly I didn't have songs, for example, or an idea of where I was going with it all. I remember being in New York, I think it was maybe a couple of years before Teenager. It would have been right when I was thinking about making my first solo record or whatever, and I had to go meet with I met with a recording, not a recording, I was at a recording studio doing something, and there was an A&R guy or someone from some New York-based record label to talk to me about potentially signing to their label or something. Mm-hmm. I don't remember what label it was, but I remember he asked me like what was I was playing him some things that I had been working on or something, and it was all, again, very casual. I didn't have any grand ideas. I was just sort of hanging out and doing a little recording and with a friend of mine there in New York, a guy called John Tiven, and he said, "What's your goal?" or something like that, and I said, I have absolutely no idea, and that somehow actually my quote got back to the manager at the time, and he told me, the guy from the record label wasn't very impressed because I guess I didn't have my shit together or whatever from his point of view or whatever. And on some level, he was right, I suppose. I didn't have anything great to play him, and I didn't have any vision, and I frequently don't have a lot of vision. I'm kind of work more in the moment, and but I think the timing of the Teenager session was good in that I had just made the previous season this Frank Black debut record or whatever, my first solo record, and so that was a lot of fun. And it was like, it was so nice to do it without a fixed band, and we could kind of do whatever we wanted, and no one was around to bother us. There wasn't any pressure about like what was going to happen after we made the record. Would there be a tour? Or there was none of that kind of discussion. It wasn't attached to any kind of trajectory of the music business. It was just everyone was fine to leave me alone, and I liked that. And so by the time we got to the whatever 6 months later, let's do another record. We were really ready to dig in and kind of be, what's the word I'm looking for? To validate ourselves and all of our itches we wanted to scratch. And basically we just wanted to hang out and make, like I say we, it was mostly Eric Feldman and I, And we had struck up a friendship in a Pixies tour a couple years before. He was playing with Per Ubu, and we were playing shows with them occasionally. And I think we met here in London, actually, at the what was then called the Town and Country Club, and that's where I first met him. And so we had kind of went, let's try something out sometime together. And anyway, so the timing was good. Timing was good for Teenager of the Year. Maybe that's why it came out quote unquote good or whatever, was because there was a lot of the timing was nice.
You seem to be on quite a creative role as well, because I understand the first album you kind of got it all down in just a few days, or on some sort of coffee bender or whatever, and it sounds from that first album as if there's a creative splurge going on, especially sort of the last three songs. I'm not sure there's a better last three songs on a record that I can think of, where it just seems like you're just banging out sort of great tunes. So did you take that through to Teenager of the Year? Because you were working all hours, I believe, right, writing for it.
Yeah, I remember on the previous Frank Black session, there was an actual visit from 4AD Records. The head of 4AD, Ivo, was on his way to L.A. Like, he never visited me in the studio, or hardly ever. But I think they wanted to. It was the first time I was stepping away from the Pixies. I had broken up the Pixies, or whatever, and so they wanted to see where I was taking my contract, and but they. I was informed like 2 days beforehand that they were coming to say hello, but I hadn't, I hadn't written any, I hadn't finished any songs, and we recorded some music that we were fond of, but that was kind of our method too. Was we focused a lot on the music and not so much the libretto or whatever, which is ultimately for pop music what turns it into a song. But I remember going to the local delicatessen there in Burbank and just furiously writing lyrics to as many songs as I could, including this song called Los Angeles, which sort of became the best song maybe, or the most known song for that record. And I remember my wife at the time, after I had never spent that much time, and I stayed up like for 2 days in a studio, and I never had done that before. No drugs or anything, just coffee and excitement, adrenaline. And I went home finally to sleep, and I went, I'm just gonna go lie. It was in the daytime, and I said, I'm gonna go lie in the hammock, and I just went so hard to sleep, and she woke me up a while later. She said I had, all this dried spittle on my face, and I had really kind of pushed it, But anyway, I thought this was all great. I loved it. And that kind of attitude and energy, I suppose, completely informed the teenager sessions. I should also add that by the time we got around to teenager, the musicians we had worked with more musicians on the first Frank Black, but it had kind of started to get narrowed down to a very small core group of people, including a guy named Lyle Workman that I mentioned, this producer, John Tiven. We had worked together on a Otis Blackwell tribute record, and he was there working with some other artist, and he was aware of this Frank Black record, and he said, if you ever want me to come to a session, I will be there. Mm-hmm. And so the other musician that would have been working out from the previous session, a drummer named Nick Vincent, who was, and I think still is, a very popular session musician in Los Angeles, and he's very good. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, I met this guy Lyle, and his reputation is that he's quite a shredder and he's quite good, and he played with a lot of kind of more complex music. Like Lyle had worked with Todd Rundgren and a band called Jellyfish and people like that. So I kind of got the impression, that he was good player, that he was quick on his feet or whatever. So I thought he would fit in with Nick and Eric, and he did. And he came down to L.A. He lived in the Bay Area at the time, and I was friendly with the drummer for Jethro Tull, and he had a rehearsal space. And I remember there was a big, what was that band? Walking in L.A., the drummer and the Dale Bosio, and the singer is Dale Bosio, but the drummer is Terry Bosio. What's the...
Again, I'll have to Google that one.
What's that band, Walking in L.A.,
I don't know that song.
Anyway, they were like a new way... Missing Persons, right? So Missing Persons, I think it was their rehearsal space, and there was a big sort of kind of faux Japanese kind of backdrop, Missing Persons, and it was set up in this rehearsal space, but that was where we would practice and go over arrangements that we were going to record, and that's where we were. And this is in the San Fernando Valley in L.A., and I remember just kind of getting up early in the morning and just like quickly going, like quote unquote writing what I would call writing a song, but what a producer would say is, well, like, yeah, great, you came up with a chord progression or whatever, but it's not a song yet. Mm-hmm. But in the hopes that they would become songs, I kind of wrote a lot of music very quickly, and I really liked it. And I would walk in, and those guys would be there, and I would go, it goes like this, da 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 da, and it would be all over the place. And they just went, okay, da 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 da, and they totally followed me, and it would be like, oh my God, what is going on? Like I had never. It's kind of like I had never driven in like a Lamborghini before. And there it was, boom, I could go anywhere I wanted, and that's not to discredit, playing in a different kind of outfit, you know what I mean? That's more rough and ready, that's another kind of a thing. I mean, I always like to think about the Pixies as being, not a garage band, because I think that we're more complicated than that. But, we have a rough and ready kind of approach. I'm a rough and ready player. I can't participate in other people's sessions on a complex level. Mm. It's very difficult for me. But my own music, of course, it's like, well, I wrote it. I have the little, eccentric, eclectic thought, idea. It's there. It's inside of me. I just did it. It's easier for me, So I can be like very spontaneous, and if something spontaneous happens and I like it, I could kind of freeze frame it in my mind and take it to people like Nick Vincent and Eric Feldman and Lyle Workman and say like that, and they just completely absorb it and understand it and are able to kind of join in with feeling very, very quickly. And so anyway, I'm saying all that because this really is the setup for doing an album like Teenager of the Year. And once we got in the studio, it didn't change. I would show up in the morning with another idea, and they would say, no problem. And they would just jump right in, and that it would exist. And I just couldn't believe it. It didn't have any, it felt almost like I was cheating or something. You know what I mean? And I really, really liked it. Anyway, this all worked out until finally the producer and Eric Feldman and Al Clay, the engineer who was co-producing, they were one of them. Al was staying at my house, and they kind of had been saying, we should probably try to, we should probably try to turn this into like a pop record with a singer and everything, and how's the lyrics coming, that kind of thing. And so I'm sure a lot of songwriters could relate to the predicament that I had found myself in. I written all these songs that weren't really songs yet, Yeah. And so Eric and Al, they composed a bunch of kind of placer lyrics for me, dummy lyrics. And they kind of very tentatively came to me one morning after coffee and said, we're not trying to say that these are lyrics for you. You could use them if you want. You don't have to. We just thought maybe just to kind of stimulate things and kind of get going. They had it all printed up in this. Looks like they went down to the stationery shop and they put it in this nice folder for me, typed it all up, all pretty and everything. And I opened it up and I was just horrified. I was just like, what is this? And this isn't what this, you think this is me? And this isn't what I sound like. And this is shit, and I didn't say this to them, but that was my reaction to it. I was very almost offended, you know what I mean? That was, and they were, they're not lyricists, you know what I mean? And they were just doing the best they could, but I got very irritated and we stopped recording for a couple of days, and I just went up into the hills of Malibu in my Cadillac, where I like to go driving around and with my guitar, and I just wrote a bunch of lyrics to a bunch of songs and came back down the mountain, so to speak, and said, all right, there, I did it. I made a couple of songs for you guys, and it was like, okay, and then we were off and running in terms of, being able to maybe finish it,
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was how the lyrics started to happen. So initially it was all just this kind of musical journey I was on and being really spontaneous and working with these guys that were really quick on their feet. And I really just was, having a blast.
The recording, as far as I understand, were there sort of wildfires and earthquakes that were sort of plaguing you?
Yes, there were. I'm trying to think of what the first actual disaster was. I believe it was, because I know we had to change studios from time to time. When we were, like I said, we were kind of going, we had ended up, we had to keep moving studios for some reason, probably because we thought we only need so much time, and we would book in for a week somewhere, and then we would not be done, because I'd be like, well, I wrote a couple more songs, and so we would we would have to go find another studio. And so in LA, there are a lot of studios, so you end up finding places, and we ended up, who owned that studio? It was Dave Stewart's studio, and he had this house, and with a tennis court and everything, and it was this classic, L.A. kind of pad, and with a beautiful studio in the back in the Carriage House. It was called the Carriage House Studios, I think, and I think it was the sister studio to his other studio, the Chapel,
which is around
in
here.
London, where the Pixies had worked before, and anyway, it was. I remember they had the studio manager would have. There was I guess a fashion at the time at the coffee shops was what they called muffin tops. It was just the top of the muffin, right? So they were these kind of like cookies, So every morning there would be warm muffin tops for us, and Jeff Lynne would be out there playing tennis, and is that Jeff Lynne out there? And we thought, this is great, Now we really this is we got some good work done at the studio, and I think because it was so damn posh, we just were so pleased with ourselves, and Eric Idle would come in after he was living in the house, so he would be filming, I guess, probably since 4 a.m. or whatever, and he would show up at 5 p.m, just blitzed, because it was the end of his day, and he'd had a few beers, and he would bring his guitar in, and he would need fresh guitar strings. He was always looking for a guitar string or something, and he was always full of advice about what we would do. We'd play him something. He'd go, well, I think that you should do this, and he was very pleasantly drunk, and so we were enjoying this kind of Hollywood kind of moment we were having, and we thought that maybe that's where we would cap it off and finish the record. And our engineer Al had to go back to the UK where he was living, and he thought, well, he did a mix of the record, and it had about 11 or 12 songs or whatever on it, and we thought, well, thank you, Al, and that's really great, but I have a couple more little song ideas that I was thinking of this morning. And he's like, I got to go. I have this other record I got to go do. And he was really not happy with where he could see where this was going, that I was still not going to call. I was going to continue. Yeah. And that's what we did. And so to answer your question, we did end up at a studio, I remember, after that. Like I said, it had all been... up to that point, it had been we moved around a lot, but like I said, we ended up in this muffin top kind of existence. And then we ended up at another studio, and these brush fires had started in L.A., and this was up in the area of L.A. called Calabasas. And we ended up at Sergio Mendez's studio. And it was getting really silly at this point. I was trying to do vocals over the CB radio from my car, and stuff like that. I was just really letting it all hang out, whatever I wanted to do. And we were in the studio, and Sergio Mendez, of course, known for his Brazil 66 and what's the woman from the lady from Ipanema, whatever it's called, and the one note what's the one note samba, whatever it's called.
The one note.
Oh, anyway, all these 60s hits,
Yeah.
It was his place, and it was up in the hills, and there was fires, and there was smoke in the air, but the police had shut down the area, so she would show up, and the studio was all the control room. Everything was black. Everything was either painted black or covered in black carpet, and so it was this black kind of windowless space. And we found after a couple of days there that we were getting really tired. And we were just exhausted all the time. And we were probably exhausted because we were exhausted, but the black carpet and everything wasn't helping. And we were so we didn't know what time of day it was, you know what I mean? We were just kind of, it's too dark in here or too black, everything's just sucking all the life out of us. We got to perk up. And so he had all, it was a fancy, kind of a nice place, but he had all these big television screens around the front of the control room, And so we put on the most colorful thing that we could find on television at that time would be the Home Shopping Network, right, with these ladies showing rings and things, and so that we were just instead of black, it was kind of this. It became very surreal. These ladies, selling their wares on the TV, and that's what we had going on, and that worked. And we kind of perked up, and we continued with the CB radio vocals and everything. And then the fires started at some point. They crept closer. I lived not too far from this area, and the fires were coming near to my house as well. And so we were all kind of watching it, in the back of our mind. But, until someone came and shut us down, we weren't going to stop. And so I guess the humor got a little dark, and then we changed the channel because we were trying to keep track of the fires, to the fires. So then it was just flames and, news guys going, here we are in Calabasas, and we were like, shit, it's in Calabasas now. What are we going to do? How many? And we literally were like pushing it to the last minute. Like, we should probably call it, they're about to shut down the town. And they did, eventually, and we had to stop. And then we went over to another studio called American Recorders that was owned by these two guys that did a lot of work with Three Dog Night and Steppenwolf. A big producer named Richie, and Bill was his partner, and Bill was the kind of house engineer, and they were older than us, and they had this kind of 60s pedigree, all these cool records, and they were really swell guys, and we liked working at their studio a lot. And I believe that's where we were hoping to finish. Anyway, we worked for a while there. Eventually, what happened was the Northridge earthquake, and then I think we were set to mix at that point, and we were at another studio. Apparently, Michael Jackson used to work in there. I forget the name of the place now, but I think it's still there. But it was a nice studio, and the engineer that was going to mix it for us, may he rest in peace, his name, a guy called David Bianco, and David had picked this studio to mix at, and I remember, it was 2-inch tape, so I had all these boxes of tape at my house, and I remember I bought a hand truck so I could move them around because of the tape. They had a lot of tapes at this point, I still have the tapes. And they had a vault at this studio. I'd never been in a studio with a vault, but they had this electronic vault where you could put all of the tapes when you weren't using them, So it makes sense that I guess a Michael Jackson would have been working there to protect so no one would steal it or whatever, So I put all these tapes in the vault, and then I remember I lived in the San Fernando Valley too. This was all in the valley, and I lived near Northridge, where this earthquake had occurred. But I remember the previous week while we were working, it was hot, and it was the summertime, and I remember we had a couple of bird feeders at the house, and I remember all the birds coming in and just emptying out the bird feeders every day. You used to just every couple of weeks you'd put some seeds and things in there, and they were just emptying it out. All these birds were coming, and my wife and I were saying, they're getting ready for an earthquake, ha ha ha, that's what's going on here. And then lo and behold, the possum that we would see in the evening was kind of stumbling around in the daylight. And we said, the possum is up. What's he doing up? Earthquake. He's earthquake weather. And it was, they talk about earthquake weather. It's this kind of still, warm kind of feeling. And that's what it was. We said, oh, it's the earthquake that's coming, California's getting ready to fall into the sea. This is a cliche, right? But this is where your mind goes. Dogs that we'd never seen before in the backyard. Ruff, 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 ruff. What is this dog doing here? We've never seen this dog before. So there was all this kind of animal activity that was odd and strange. And we kept kidding about it. And then, lo and behold, 4 o'clock in the morning, the house was shaking, and there was this big earthquake, and the whole town got shut down, and we were scheduled to go into the studio, but of course we couldn't, and we could. No one could do anything. And I remember Eric and I and my wife, we had no power at the house. So we were cooking off all the food on the grill in the backyard to use it up, and we were like cooking pizzas out there and all kinds of things. And it was okay, but I had we couldn't get into the studio. Said, well, even if you can't record here now, but. And we can't get your tapes anyway because the vault has been shut down. It's electric, and no one can get their tapes. So we were like, we can't get the tapes, and we don't have any food. And I had dug what is called, I believe, a commode. I had dug a toilet in the backyard because we had no water, and I had all the soap and water out there and a little shovel and everything, and. My wife was just like, no. After about a day of that, when I said, I dug a commode in the backyard, she's like, I don't think this is working for me. And so someone had the idea, let's go to Las Vegas and spend a week there or something and wait for L.A. to kind of come back online. And so we did. We flew to L.A. We flew from L.A. to Vegas. And we went to a bunch of old, like, rock shows, like old timers. And we saw one night Frankie Valli, and his opener was none other than Sergio Mendes at Brazil 99, I think he was calling it. And he was really great. And that was kind of a nice kind of validation. We're like, oh, yeah. We were just working at his crazy soul-sucking black studio up in the hills there.
I'm glad you mentioned it.
Here he is out in Vegas, and that was kind of nice. And we flew back. We flew back to L.A. when it was all done, and we were able to finally finish the record there at the studio with the vault. And, so anyway, yes, earthquakes and forest fires.
It's quite an epic making of what is an epic record as well. I mean, at what point, obviously, double albums are kind of they're landmark and sort of, they're big moments. They're sort of statement records in people's careers. At what point did you realize this was going to be yours?
Right around the time when we were leaving the Dave Stewart studio, because we had a record there, and we knew that if we went beyond that sonically, at least on the vinyl version, which was very not much a priority at that time. CDs were still relatively new in the early 1990s, even though that's what everyone was doing. It was still kind of a new format, and with that, you could go as long as you wanted. You could go to about an hour and 15 minutes, I think, hour and 20 minutes, something like that. So we knew we had lots of leg room with this CD thing because no one cared about the vinyl or the cassette anymore. Anyway, so we said, well, it's going on CD, so we can just keep doing this. And so it ended up being about 62 minutes long, which is not particularly long for a double album, I suppose. A lot of the songs are short, but it is, in fact, in the double album area, because if you divide that evenly among 4 vinyl sides, it works out. If you try to put 60 minutes or so, or 62 minutes on one piece of vinyl, it doesn't sound good. It sounds thin. It won't represent what your work, you know. So we weren't planning, like I said, we weren't thinking double album. We were just thinking we just want more, you know. And we have, everyone's doing CD now, so it doesn't matter, right? So I don't know that we were calling it a double album. It's just that we knew we had, technically speaking, we had the space for it, you know.
It sounded it sounded more like a statement record also because I guess the previous 3 records you'd made had a kind of sci-fi theme running through them. And this record seemed to sort of draw back from that and give a wider perspective of where that came from with the sort of the teenage sort of theme that you picked up on. It was like, okay, this is the whole person. This is an image of the whole person, if you like. So what? Obviously, the teenager of the year idea. I mean, where did that come from? Because there was an award you actually won when you were a
also
teenager.
For a title, yeah. I mean, I don't know that while making the record that it would have had a title yet. That probably came afterwards. But I think because it was this big kind of, we felt like it was our kind of a slightly cocky statement or something in terms of the scope of the record. You know, I even attempted to do some sort of like pop kind of reggae thing a la, you know, UB40 or something like that. You know, I was sort of went out on a limb musically that I went to territory maybe that I was not supposed to go to, you know. So I was feeling cocky, you know. And yeah, I had in high school received an award called Teenager of the Year from this small rural high school that I attended for about a year in my last year of high school. And I remember my mother had kept the medallion and the plaque or whatever that I got from it wasn't a particularly noble award, I don't think. I mean, my brother got it the following year, and you know, my brother and I had spent our teen years in Los Angeles, but we had gone back to New England for the last couple of years of our education, and we lived in this kind of farm town that was kind of, like I said, I would call it rural. It wasn't really rural, but it was agricultural, I guess is what you could say. It's agricultural, and most of the people that, from there are second, third generation Portuguese and Azorean people. And so they were all kind of, you know, Portuguese, Catholic, sort of dark hair, and we had just sort of got off the plane from L.A., and I had hair then, and we were kind of long and blonde and kind of Rod Stewart-y looking or something, you know what I mean, from L.A., you know, and they thought that we were weird, you know, they thought we were kind of, and we were a friendly couple of guys, but they didn't, the kids in this little town that we had ended up in had never met anyone from Hollywood, you know what I mean? So they thought that we were kind of strange, a little weird, and it was a very small school. But eventually they came around to liking us, and we liked them, and you know, we didn't have particularly good grades or anything like that, you know, but the staff at the school thought we were swell, so they had this Teenager of the Year award. I don't know if they invented it just for us or whatever. I like to think they did. Maybe they did, because I don't know what we did to earn it, but they was at a awards banquet at a place called White's, and it's this place, you know, where you would have where you have a bar mitzvah or something, or a sports awards or something like that. You know what I mean? And they had you know, chicken, fish, or beef or whatever, and you know, it was that kind of an industrial place, and that's where they had the awards ceremony. I showed up and they gave me a thing, and I think I got $50, not in cash, which I would have loved, but if you were going to go on to university, which I did briefly, they would give you $50 credit towards your books, And so I was like, all right, well, I used it. I went to college the following year and got $50 knocked off my books. But Teenager of the Year. Anyway, it always stuck with me, that I had Teenager of the Year. So I'd be looking for a title. Teenager of the Year, I'm the Teenager of the Year. I probably felt like I was a bit of a teenager making the record, you know what I mean? It was a lot of, it definitely had a youthful energy to it, you know what I mean? And which was nice because I had already made, 6 records or whatever. So I was, at that point, I wouldn't call myself a veteran, but from some people's point of view, I guess I had experience in that world. And so it was nice to kind of have the same kind of enthusiasm and excitement, kind of energy that I probably had at my very first recording sessions,
Did you make any kind of conscious decision to look back at your youth on this record?
Not in a contemplative way, thereby inspiring the songs, but because, I was parked the side of the road up in the Malibu Hills going, fuck, what rhymes with this and what rhymes with that, and I needed songs, I needed lyrics, I needed content, and I just was, it wasn't that I was at a loss for content necessarily, but pretty much every time I make a record, I do run into this kind of writer's block when it comes to the libretto. And then until I figure out how to break through that door, it's very stuck. As long as I can just think about music, I'm fine. You know what I mean? But the lyric part of it, the part where I have to step up to the microphone, that's where I really am stuck. And I can become, once I become unstuck, it flows. But anyway, I just was really, had to just dig into lots of things to write this record. And like I said, I wasn't, whatever the cliche is, you have your whole life to write your first record and you got 6 months to write your next record. And it's really true. So 6, 7 records in, there I was, what the hell do I write about? You know what I mean? And, of course you mentioned the sci-fi stuff. I hadn't shut that off yet, but maybe I was looking for something else, something more. I didn't want to write a concept record. You know what I mean? We weren't doing that. With a unifying theme or anything like that. It was certainly musically, it wasn't a unifying theme. It was all over the place. So lyrically, I suppose it made sense that it also would be all over the place.
Yeah. If we start with talking about whatever happened to Pong. Because that's kind of a really great sort of introduction to the record. And stylistically, as you say, there's no boundaries to it, and it kind of already starts with this, shape shifting sort of song, which is one of the ones that seems to sort of harken back to your youth. I mean, is the story true about hustling in bars, playing Pong? Yes,
there's a bar that my father used to work at called Jack's Lounge. It's still there, in fact. And he was a bartender there for a while. My brother and I, we didn't live with him, but we would go visit him on the weekends sometimes, that kind of thing. And so we would frequently be waiting for him to finish up his shift or whatever, But sometimes if it was a daytime shift, or sometimes even a nighttime shift, he would allow us to hang out at the bar. Mm-hmm. And this would have been in the 1970s, some point, the early 70s. And we were used to playing pool and bumper pool and certainly pinball, that kind of thing in the bars that we used to hang out in. This particular place was the very first place that I'm aware of that had this new kind of game. I guess is what we would call digital, or some. Is it digital? I think it's digital. Some type of it was. We had never seen anything like it before. So this was. We didn't even have. People didn't have consoles for their TV. All this kind of gaming, and that didn't exist. Or the little handheld things that would come even later. So it was only in bars and places or arcades that you would play pinball and that kind of thing. This game showed up called Pong, and it was a very simple, it was like tennis, and you had these two paddles, which is like two lines, and the ball was a dot, and it made a little doot, 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 and you would kind of, and it would ricochet all over and get faster and faster. My brother and I got very good at it, and the clients at the bar didn't understand what was going on with all this. Of course, they were from a completely different generation, and so they were a little intrigued, and they would try to play us, and so we would try to hustle them for a couple of bucks, and kind of if I win, I get $1 or whatever, so we could play more games, and I suppose. Even though it's a very short ditty, kind of like a Pong game, and it doesn't start like that. It starts off with this very cinematic ba 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 da da da. It's this sort of like, it almost feels like the very high shot. Swooping down onto the scene, da 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 da, and Eric put these kind of Mellotron-y kind of strings or whatever on it, and it kind of boom, 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 and then da 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 boom, and then you were in, and it really, I don't know if the shape of the music. Influenced the lyric or not. I mean, but in hindsight, it seems like it would have, the sort of setup of like where in the Jack's Lounge there, off we go, whatever happened to Pong, it just became, and I remember that was one of the first ones that I sang too, and I remember, it felt like it was a little out there, the idea, like I don't know, I don't think that everybody in the studio necessarily, they all knew what I was talking about, I think, with the Pong, but I think that it was unexpected. That was that's your opening, statement is this, but it worked or whatever. It had excitement, what I mean? And so everyone was like, great. Yes.
Yeah, in the same way as Los Angeles does on the first solo album, isn't it? It wrong foots you a little bit, and it sort of sets off this atmosphere of So what's going on? You never know what to expect after that. Eric
was very good at kind of and is very good at teasing out, like hearing your little musical thought, your kind of notes, your few little notes or chords where you're going, and making little things big, and kind of going, this is where we're going to have this is where the king walks into the room, and sits at his throne before he begins his opening statement,
about Pong.
And so what would be like a little ditty for me on the guitar, he would kind of turn it into this, more cinematic kind of a thing. But that is the opening track on the record, I believe.
And then if we follow the thread of kind of nostalgia and youth through it, if we move on to Two Reelers.
If all you see is violence, well then I make a plea.
I assume it's because you were a big fan of the Three Stooges, and was that sort of something that epitomised your youth?
Yes, I suppose. I mean, I think that I liked the Three Stooges, but I think that as an adult, I had become smitten with them again or whatever, because I was able to see the intelligence or whatever behind all of the slapstick. And Eric Feldman, maybe I say Eric Feldman because I think because Eric, he even appreciated, he appreciated more. He appreciated like the Marx Brothers, whatever, which was a little too intellectual for me. I didn't quite follow all of the Marx Brothers stuff. But Eric, I don't know if it's because he was because he was Jewish or whatever, that he somehow like understood the Three Stooges even better. But I think he did, and he was a bigger fan, and I think he even had met them, I think, or something.
Wow.
When he grew up in L.A., and his dad was always taking him to Vegas and places like that, and he would always meeting these showbiz people, you know what I mean? And I think that he had, I don't know if he had met them or one of them that was still alive or whatever, but he was much more steeped in Three Stooges than I was. I liked them from when I was a kid, but he like knew about them, and like where they were from. They were like from Brooklyn, from vaudeville. His parents were from Brooklyn, and it was this kind of more of a context for where they were from and what their lives were like. You know what I mean? Or what they pushed up against to do their thing. You know what I mean? He was aware of their artistic struggle. And kind of so they became, even from the previous record, we were always talking about the Three Stooges. And I still have a framed picture of them that Eric gave me on the previous record, because we talked about the Three Stooges so much for some reason. And so they became a kind of a holy trinity, you know what I mean? Because it wasn't just that they were being silly and they were falling down, but there was something else in them that was noble. And so when I by the time Teenager arrived, and I had some music, I was ready to elevate them to this kind of, I knew enough and I understood enough about them, that I could articulate my more emotional feelings about them.
Interesting line in there about sort of the world needs more silly men, because we've got a lot of silly men in charge now. We've certainly had some. I don't know if it's necessarily worked out as well as we.
I think a different kind of silly. I think, as I was referring to.
Yeah.
It's not the silliness of idiocy, but it is the silliness of kind of it's an existential silliness. It's about our puniness as a species or whatever. And so I think that I still hold them in very high regard.
And then if we another song that's referencing 60s, 50s and 60s, Bad Wicked World.
Bad wicked world, bad wicked world. They are about just to deceive conquistadores that have been.
About the invaders. Is that kind of a subliminally sort of talking about sort of maybe the origins of your science fiction fascination of that time, in that sort of 60s B-movie sort of vein? Well,
we didn't have... This is just at the dawn of sort of like lots of channels, and being able to kind of easily record things off of television, and of course it was still, I mean, there were still video stores everywhere at that point, they were just kind of rising, to their position there. Back in the early 1990s. So people were accessing, this is before the internet really, so people were accessing all of these things, things, famous TV shows and films and obscurities and whatever, know. So like a lot of people, hanging out on tour buses and hotel rooms and stuff, I think we were able to deep dive or whatever into some of these things that we had maybe missed out on because they were maybe slightly before our time or whatever, And I had become quite obsessed with a television program called The Invaders, and the main character was he had the knowledge, that is to say, he knew that they existed, and they were among us, and they were quite evil, and they pretended to be us, but they were not us, and so they were kind of. He had this kind of duality in his kind of his existence, in that he was always on the run because they were trying to get him, because he knew and he was going to out them. But at the same time, he was trying to convince people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so he was constantly in search of someone that would listen to him. And the the one thing, ironically, I've ended up with this. I busted my hand a few years ago, and the one thing that you could tell if they were, it's quite clever, these old science fiction shows, they always have one little mechanism that doesn't cost anything, right? But, it works for the plot, And if you were an alien, for some reason, the aliens, they couldn't bend their pinky, you know what I mean? And so they'd be doing things that if, it was kind of this kind of a thing, And so David Vincent was his name, the character. And so in the show, he would always, suddenly he would notice someone that was, doing this, and oh my God, there they are, and I've ended up like that on my right hand.
No, I mean, he's questioning you now.
But anyway, so that's where that came from. I think at that time, I was watching that, and it was nice too, because it was I believe it was an hour-long program, and that may not sound significant, but when you think about people nowadays, and we were watching a lot of things that are very, very short, including things that are called memes that are literally a second long, and so people's attention span is quite a different kind of thing now. But back then, this show is from the 60s, but I say back then, but even back in the 90s, watching a program that was an hour long, it wasn't unusual. But the kind of the depth of the acting, or lack thereof, would really come out, or the storyline or whatever. There was a whole hour there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Of for people to either be brilliant or to screw it up, right? So anyway, it's an interesting, different kind of headspace. And so why would you be influenced by a TV show? Well, it wasn't just a TV show. It's an hour long. You know what I mean? There's more than one of them. It's like a whole world that you're kind of involved in.
So this wasn't...
And I just had this these little sort of minute and a half ditties that I was trying to compose the words for. And so it's kind of a challenge to kind of say, I have this whole world that I want to tell people about. This show, it's kind of an obscure television program. It's not famous even in the States, but how can I explain all this world in this little song that I have? That's just and it's over. But there you go. That's the challenge, and it's a kind of a fun challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I pick up on that. So this wasn't something you watched when as a youth. It was something you picked up in the 90s. This show.
It would have been at the time. It would have been concurrent with I think making the record, or maybe shortly before.
Yeah,
before that.
It's quite interesting because the theme of they walk among us is something that's sort of cropped up in a lot of your work. I mean, you've written a lot of songs about the interrelation between humans and sort of fantastical creatures or sci-fi creatures. So obviously that show wasn't the root of it, because you'd done a bit before that. But
I mean, I was still, I guess you could say that the kind of UFO culture in the United States at that time was sort of, it was the kind of domain of like conspiracy theories, not not the kind of conspiracy theories that we have now, but kind of silly ones, but it wasn't all silly. I mean, I had a couple of UFO experiences as a younger person, and so it was there. I wasn't traumatized by it or anything like that, but I was intrigued, and it kept me intrigued. And I didn't really have anything to go on except weirdo books that I found, and things like UFO conferences they would have out by the airport in some hotel, and I would go to these things. Or when I was traveling around, I would take that extra journey and go down to Roswell, and in Roswell, New Mexico. Back then, I remember going there to go check it out. It was literally like a little, tiny bookstore in the downtown that had a little window with some books related to the subject matter, and that was it. It wasn't like a whole thing, it wasn't a whole industry or whatever. It was still kind of obscure, and so I guess I avoid all that now because it feels like, science fiction is kind of takes up a lot of space in television and film and art and everything, even more or whatever. And I don't know, somehow it feels like too much now. But at that time, I still felt comfortable. I didn't feel like I was putting anyone off.
Yeah.
So I didn't mind introducing it as a thought.
There's you talk about the sort of formative experiences of UFO things, and there's also a hint of that in The Vanishing Spies about sort of when you almost saw the Mars probe that went missing. I don't know which year that was, but
The Vanishing Spies, something I read a couple of
and then this song is sort of about the idea of the idea of an empty universe you find sort of unbearable. What can you remember about that? Was that the sense you got from almost seeing the probe?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what set me off on that song. If it was specifically the Mars probe, or it could have been a combination of that and maybe a story that I had read, a science fiction story. Publisher of Penthouse magazine used to have a magazine called Omni, and they had magazine articles, that kind of thing in it. But it was fairly dedicated to fiction, and they always had 3 or 4 stories in every issue. And I was a fan of that magazine, and I read it a lot. And so it may have been about the Mars probe that you referenced, but the idea that you send off this drone, what we call now a drone or something like that, you know what I mean, and then to go and see something that you can't see from where you are, right? And then to lose control of it, of course, and of course in space or whatever, it just keeps going,
Yeah.
It doesn't stop, because space is a big place, even though it's full of stuff, you know what I mean. If you or I were to float out there, chances are we could go for eternity without ever encountering another object.
Yeah.
Which is sort of unfathomable when you look up at night. How would I be able to go in a straight line and not hit something? You know what I mean? But it's true, you might not.
Yeah.
And if you were to hit something, it might just be if not a speck, a mote of dust. It might be just a rock or an asteroid, or even if it were a planet eventually, you might not ever run into anything that had anything on it representing what we would call life, you know. In fact, there might not be any up there at all. No life at all. We're it. That's it. We're the crazy party that happened. We're that little thing, that special little thing that doesn't exist anywhere else. So I think that the idea of there being nothing is a little more haunting than I wonder what other interesting creatures are out there, you know.
Yeah.
So I think the song "Vanishing Spies" probably is the singer anyway is probably is embodies more that kind of thought, the haunted feeling of I am completely and utterly alone, and when I am gone, it will all be gone, right? Or when we are gone, it will all be gone.
And there is that sense that there's a thread running through the record of recognizing that and appreciating that, but also, you know, advocating taking care of the planet we've got. I mean, if we look at Big Red.
Have you heard about Big Red? They even brought a big red rig to help the flowers in the mean space.
About terraforming Mars. But the moral of the song seems to be it's a long and lonely journey to get out there. Let's take care of the planet we've got instead.
Let me see. I don't know. I'm trying to think of some of the words from that. If I don't know. Not to correct you or whatever, but I feel like whenever I have approached, you know, so-called an environmental kind of theme, I guess the most famous example of in my repertoire would be a song called "Monkey Gone to Heaven," right? I have tried to inhabit a more neutral place. In other words, I'm just an observer. I'm just here to talk about what's going on, and I can't say that there is no sort of cautionary word or judgment or something within that. I can't completely psychologically remove myself from myself and be completely, you know, neutral in some sort of purist way. But I think that I have tried anyway to kind of not go there because it feels too preachy.
Right.
And maybe that's not cool or something. I don't know, right? I'm trying to think of like what's my motivation here. Having said that, you know, I'm going there. We're going to talk about that. In this case, there's an author that I had become fond of who wrote this a trilogy of books called I don't know, I forget what it's called. About California, the three Californias. Anyway, he had also written a trilogy about the terraformation of Mars by humans. And so that was very fresh in my mind. But it's, here I am in my bucket today, you know. It's really about, it's the emotion of a song like that is really more along the lines of I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I'm leaving, and because I'm going very far, I won't be coming back. And this is all new. This is all. It's not just goodbye. It's really goodbye. It's not goodbye. I'm going to die. It's goodbye. I will never be here. You and I will never meet again, because we're going to another place that's very, very, very far away. It's not possible to just jump back and forth. And so the song, we're going to do this, we're going to do that up there. There's the ambition of maybe what's propelling you to go in the first place, but really, it's really about, you know, I would say there's a Neil Young song which touches on this emotion, which probably I've carried with me my whole life. and that would be from the title track from After the Gold Rush, which talks about the silver rockets, and it's sort of like, well, some of us are the chosen few. Some of us are going, and some of us are not. Some of us got to there's not enough room for everybody. The ship's going down, but some of us are going to escape, and we're going to go, and sorry, goodbye, and we love you, and we love you. But it's that kind of, it's kind of heavy and beautiful at the same time.
And now Musk is trying to turn that into a reality. That's very strange how predictive some of this stuff is. And if again, sort of following the thread, yes, being neutral on the topic of environmental urgency, but I mean, if we look at thalassocracy. It's about kind of an underwater power that's sort of complaining about what humankind has done to the oceans and kind of plotting a sort of revenge. Does that kind of seem like a sequel to Monkey Gone to Heaven or even Palace of the Brine for you?
Thalassocracy is an unusual word, I suppose. I guess it's a Greek. I didn't have the internet back then, but I did have odd little books that I would find on tour, and I had found a small dictionary of unusual words. In thalassocracy, I stumbled upon that word, kingdom of the sea, and so the idea of the sort of nautical myth and that kind of thing, nautical places, much like outer space, inner space kind of a thing, is something that I'm drawn to from time to time. Lots of my songs go there. So yeah, thalassocracy, I think, is probably it's a judgmental, but of course the singer of the song is thalassocracy. He represents thalassocracy. He is the diplomat from Thalos or whatever. He's sort of commenting. It's a commentary on you, they who are above the sea, that are on the land, right? So I think I was able to probably get away with. It's not an entirely serious song, but the song was able to get away with perhaps making some sort of commentary without sounding preachy, because he who spake the words is of. It has that perspective, right? It's an underwater perspective. Literally, it's an underwater. I here, in my Neptune place, can comment on you there in your air breathing space up there on the land, and I have. You don't understand. You think you've got it all worked out. You're running around up there with all of your energy, doing all of your things up there. But down here in the dark, in the depths, you don't really understand how it all works. I'm in the inner space. I'm closer to the core. I am closer to I am from the depths, you know what I mean? And you are out there in the peripheral kind of zone, so I was happy to find that word, because I was able to switch the emotion there again without sounding. Yeah, you could do that without sounding like, oh God, here he.
And then a song from the land perspective. I mean, Calistan.
Used to be 16 lanes. Used to be Nuevo Spain. Used to be.
About kind of the inevitable decline of Los Angeles into rack and ruin.
I think that goes probably again to the Kim Stanley Robinson novels. He wrote these books called The Three Californias that I mentioned, and so I think the song. Kim Stanley Robinson's very good at talking about the near future, not the distant future, but the near future. And so his novels are full of things that you understand and can comprehend, and you're able to suspend your disbelief and completely be there because you're like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about, even though we don't have that yet. I knew it was gonna be like that. I just had a feeling, you know. And the Three Californias are a great trilogy of books, and it just talks a lot about California in a way that makes you feel like you're in California, but it's not one that you've experienced just yet. Philip K. Dick does this also in a nice way that I find very satisfying, and. Calistan, it just talks, because California is like everywhere, is an ever-changing place. I guess calling it Calistan might imply somehow that maybe someone from Asia, people from Asia, like Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, or whatever, people from Turkic peoples or whatever, ended up inhabiting California or whatever at some point in the future. I don't know. That would be the reason that I would call it that. But the song is not so on the nose. It's not really trying to explain everything. It's not trying to add it all up so it makes sense. It just talks about, this used to be Native American, or this used to be Spanish, this used to be Japanese, this used to be English speaking, this used to be this culture, that culture, combination of this culture. Talking about Phil K. Dick, he touches on this a little bit in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the whole Blade Runner thing of future speak, you know what I mean? Things like you get in what's the Burgess novel there?
Clockwork Orange.
Clockwork Orange, you know what I mean? So this idea that that people are so precious about their culture and about their language or whatever and their customs and everything, but it's constantly changing and it's constantly mixing with itself and with other things, and you can't do anything about it. You know what I mean? It's beyond human control, and at the same time, it's completely driven by humans. It's completely, as a lone human, you cannot control where this is all going, wherever we are, whatever it is that we're doing. You think maybe it's going to be like this, or you think it was like this, and it's like, no, it wasn't like that. It was like something else before then. It's just like, you don't understand. We're just kind of like, we're all in the way. We're all little mollusks and fishes just floating around in these great surf waves, you know what I mean? And without any control, so it's a kind of, I guess it's a way of looking at California from a very, very high mountain peak that overlooks a very, very long period of time, at least from a human perspective. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's the best I can come up with. But I enjoyed playing that song. People seem to like it, even though the subject matter is a little abstracted or whatever. It's not clear what the song is about, or what kind of who the singer is, and what his motivation is, or where he's going, or where he fits in with all of this. He's just at a very high peak somewhere, kind of going, wow, what a journey! What a long, strange trip it's been. You know what I mean? It's not really explaining the journey. It's just sort of pointing out some interesting things that we saw along the way.
That's, and from there, I guess there's a great thread through the record of, just fabulous ideas. It kind of an indication of sort of how your brain was sparking on what to write about if you were writing these so quickly as well. just sort of out there ideas like I want to live on abstract plane.
I wanna live on an abstract plane.
Obviously, sort of going into a different multi-dimensional sort of idea now. What would be better about it?
I don't know, but I think the closest that I've been able to come to understand abstraction in a literary sense, and I'm not a very well-read person, but I can say that I have quite enjoyed reading Samuel Beckett and not basically understanding it, and not being able to really connect with it in a way that maybe he even intended for the reader to connect with it. You know what I mean? But I'm quite intrigued, and I'm quite intrigued with those abstracted places that I have discovered in writing and in film. You might once you boil it all down, it might just for someone like me, it might just represent escapism. As opposed to being able to have a kind of a fascinating existential thought that kind of hints at some sort of philosophy or something like that. It's more just like, oh, you mean there's a place that I can go and that doesn't make sense or whatever, that is not what this is, that is I suppose if you were to talk about maybe escapism is also related to surrealism, and I suppose that the main cornerstone of surrealism, we tend to kind of, I suppose as kind of half-assed culture types like myself, we tend to we probably misunderstand surrealism. And we think all kinds of things are surreal or whatever, but really when you get, I suppose, to the heart of surrealism, and I think that those people at that time are mid-century modern, people were people that were called themselves surrealists, were probably after something that represents more the area of psychology and sort of interpreting dreams, for example, or sort of acknowledging that dreams, if we don't understand them, they're important or something, and that if you're really going to be a surrealist, that you need to tap into what's going on there in your dream world. That's truly an abstract place, but yet it's a place. You wake up every morning and you go, guess where I was, I've had a lot of funny dreams this week. I don't know that I've ever really incorporated my dreaming into my actual songs. I'm not trained in that way. I think a lot of surrealists probably try to train themselves to kind of journal that, to kind of hold on to those fragments of dreams and then bring it into. I suppose that's why they ended up doing things like automatic writing and that kind of thing, or things that we would call random. But I think that randomness is another method of trying to get where your dreams were. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. I suppose this probably I suppose they must have been influenced by the whole idea of psychology. I suppose the whatever 19th century. Psychology, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. But for us, it's just sort of like, oh, this doesn't seem real. How surreal is this? But I think, and I even forget about it as an artist. Like, I don't sit around and I am a surrealist. You know what I mean? I just kind of enjoy myself, and I end up in a lot of abstract places, thematically or whatever. But I think if I were to really stop for a moment and kind of think about what it is I'm doing. It's, oh, well, maybe I'm trying to become a surrealist or something like that, which means I would be in a much more kind of studious way, contemplative way, trying to extract something from that dream world and present it here in our waking place. You know what I mean? Because it's important.
Yeah. I mean, there are obviously surreal ideas running through the record. If we look at Headache.
Got me so down, I got me a headache. My heart is drowned in my queen.
I mean, I've never been able to work out. I mean, it was obviously inspired by A Wrinkle in Time, the novel. Is the song sort of following the plot of that, or is it a bit more personal? Is it a bit sort of, wanting
Much
to go
more
back in time?
personal. I mean, I'm thinking, what is that song about? I think it's a kind of a sad love song, I think is what it is. And it's that notion of, I love you and you love me, but eternity trumps us and it trumps our love. Like, someday I won't exist, someday you won't exist. Our love won't exist. Oh my God. You know what I mean? It's that kind of like, and so the singer on that song allows himself to go through time to other places. It talks about the trees, it talks about the rings of the trees, and it talks about forests and things that exist on a much longer time scale, right? Beyond our time scale, right? And there you are. It's a kind of it's going to be all right. I went back in time and there you were, you and I. Oh, I went to the future. There we were.
Right.
We thought we were dead, but our love, whatever, it's out there somewhere.
I always wondered if it was sort of just literally an interest or a need to sort of go back to a previous point in a relationship and sort of live there for a while. I don't know if that was.
No, I think that would have been for me too complete of a thought. You know what I mean? I think that the only thought is this wrinkle in time, it's giving me a headache or whatever. It's like, I'm stuck here. I'm here and I can't do anything about it. I'm here and I can't be there and I can't be there. I'm here. And it's a conundrum, right? Because you want to think out, you want your life and your consciousness or whatever, you want it to be out here. You want it to be out here where the trees are, or maybe even out where the stars are. We all want to live forever, right?
It's it's become your best known solo song. How do you feel about that?
That's good, because I think if we could get away from the subject matter, I think that from a musical point of view, I think that we were trying to. I remember that was the song that it sort of showed up suddenly at the Dave Stewart studio, and Eric immediately got the musical vibe of it. He understood, and the feeling I think that we were trying to go for was like kind of a very California sound, and the best thing I can relate it to would be Creedence Clearwater Revival. So it wasn't that we were trying to ape that or whatever, but there's some kind of a tough feeling that's also musical and kind of it's not aggressive, mind you, but it's solid in the way that John Fogerty songs are. And so I think that is, for lack of a better comparison, that's what we were trying to do, was a kind of a Creedence kind of a thing, which I enjoy very much. And I think it's one of those. He's one of those references that I'm constantly trying to get in that I want to, it's like I want to do one of those. And he's not the only one. He's not the only type of expression that I might try to go for, obviously. But when the song starts to, there's this idea that, yes, you're a songwriter, but it's kind of like what happens before you have a full song is you have just a little nugget of an idea. You just have one chord, one note, one little melody, one little move, one little transition. There's some little thing that excites you, that turns you on, and you're like, there it is, that little spot, right? That little spot there. What's that? And then you follow it. You know what I mean? And then when you finally hang it up, hopefully you will be where you were supposed to end up, right? And so anyway, Creedence definitely would be like when you find a Creedence kind of a stride or something like that, you try to follow it, without sounding like you're trying to do an impersonation or something like that. You try to follow that and let the song be what it is, you know what I mean? So anyway, I don't know, that's my Creedence song. And he's a popular guy. He's a popular band. So if it's my best one from that record or the most known song from that record, then I like to think, okay, maybe I kind of did it a little bit. You know what I mean?
My favourite's Fiddle Riddle.
Once stood a man on my face. Oh yeah, on my face.
Just because it is so different, and it's an incredible tune, and it seems to, I don't know if it sort of, hints back to stuff like the Specials and Madness, or you were saying UB40. And
sure, all of those bands would have been bands that I would have discovered as a teenager, sort of after the fact, even, or maybe while it was going on, I suppose. But through things like MTV and music that was coming from England, right? Even though when I was a teenager, I wasn't really that familiar with reggae music, I did hear reggae suddenly music in these kind of pop groups like Madness and UB40 or whatever, and then I discovered reggae music, I suppose. But I really liked that kind of smooth pop thing that some of those artists were very good at, I think. I suppose, like you could almost say that it was the Clash. Certainly they have their reggae influences that they like to kind of tap into, but certainly the more pop end of things, goes, I think, I don't know what you would call it. Maybe you would call it lovers rock or something like that. Something smooth, and something kind of romantic almost, you know what I mean? And it's a kind of it's not an aggressive thing. It's a smooth thing. It's a loving thing. It's a kind of, I don't know. It's a more of an R&B thing, I guess, or something like that. I don't know. I definitely tend to be and then even with my reggae, I tend to, when I listen to old reggae from the 60s or whatever, and even and 70s, I tend to go for the more vocal group stuff, that is more smooth and more kind of in that vein, as opposed to something that's more punchy or whatever. I like that stuff too, but the lovers rock stuff I really enjoy, and I think that my Fiddle Riddle was an attempt to kind of do that, to say to sing in this kind of softer place,
a fascinating song also because there's a million guitar bands out there that owe you an awful large debt from the work you've done. But when that song particularly seems to me that there are songs on the first Gorillaz album that seem like 10 years later seems to really sort of very linked into Fiddle Riddle.
I think I knew enough at the time about music that I didn't just go into doing the whatever you call the upswing on the rhythm guitar, the which is kind of like like fake reggae if it's done kind of without the right nuance or something like that. That's the, as non-reggae, if you didn't grow up listening to reggae, you might pick that out in a pop arrangement. Oh, that's reggae, right? But it's more nuanced than that, and there's a lot of other things going on. So I remember specifically at that time, I mean, I had the general shape of the song, and it started off with the piano figure. That was the root. That was the nugget I'm talking about. This, oh, what's this? This is what we have to follow, and that became this kind of more, I suppose what maybe someone more critical would call, I guess, cod reggae or whatever, like not authentic, right? So I already knew that I was kind of stepping into dangerous territory for the reggae fans. Like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, you do not belong here. You're gonna suck at this. You mean, you're not even gonna be as good as Paul Simon. At least he flew Leslie Kong in or whatever, to produce his record, But, so I just, I started to listen to, I got some records with Slide Robbie playing on them, or whatever, some of those records, so I could focus in on some of the other elements to make sure that the drums or the keyboard or whatever were not get too Holiday Inn, not too kind of fake, not too wedding band, you know what I mean? So, without getting really musicologist about it, I was referencing a lot of records, actual reggae records at the time, knowing I wasn't trying to do an actual kind of reggae song, that I wanted to make certain elements of it correct. I don't know how correct or incorrect it all is. There's no rules at the end of the day. But, I wanted to do something that was at least not bullshit, you know what I mean? That sounded cool, and I don't know. I think we got there. We got the Morris Tepper came in and played Vihuela, which is a kind of an early folk instrument. It's a guitar. Usually, it's wrapped with fish gut for frets or whatever. It's a very simple. It's like a ukulele kind of, But anyway, he brought his Vihuela in, and that kind of at least got it to some sort of slightly Caribbean place, without, he didn't know what the song was going to be. He just brought it, Someone said, bring your Bihuela. He was into the Bihuela at the time, you know what I mean? Which is more of a thing that you would find in Spain, or Portugal, or whatever. But because it's a small stringed instrument like that, it did inadvertently, he didn't know that he was going to be performing it on. He just brought it. But he played the solo on that song, and it definitely brought it to some kind of like, to a pre-reggae place, shall we say? You know what I mean? To a more 1950s Caribbean music, from somewhere in the West Indies or whatever. You know what I mean? Unintentionally, yeah. The feeling I think I was trying to go for was more, like I said, like Badness or UB40 even, or something like that. Something more pop, more smooth. And I had a lot of fun recording that song. And subject matter, it's another little sci-fi kind of a journey, but it's got nothing to do with anything that it's not a very earthy kind of subject matter. It's all outer space shit,
I'll tell you what, in order to wrap up, let's do one last one on just mentioning the historical characters on the record, just so we've spoken about those. So if we look at
William Mulholland, I think,
and Superabound.
Oh, Superbound. Probably my favorite song from the record.
Yeah.
At least to perform. I always have enjoyed playing that song. Probably because it's kind of a faux Bob Dylan kind of a thing, from, circa Blonde on Blonde or something like that, I think I was kind of go for that kind of feeling or something. And super, and that song is actually told from the perspective. This is so ridiculous. That song is told from the perspective of a Bigfoot.
All right. That's in PT Barnum's.
No. Like the Northwestern kind of, or Yeti they would call in Asia, but it's this large kind of hairy beast that everyone says, oh, they're out there somewhere in the woods, but no one's really seen one. But, we've got a couple of pictures or whatever, So it's really a Bigfoot song is what it is. But again, it's a kind of, it's a way of judging, and it's a way of commenting on humans and humanity from a non-human perspective, so that I can get to a place of commentary without sounding like I'm being holier than thou. You know what I mean? I didn't realize that until this discussion today that how often, at least on this record, that I use that trick or whatever to kind of adopt another non-human perspective so that I can say something about humans without sounding like I'm writing some fucking protest song or something like that. Nothing against protest songs, but I think that's musically the attitude is certainly up tempo, Bob Dylan, mid 1960s, blonde on blonde. Like Quinn Quinn the Mighty Eskimo or something like that. That's the kind of preaching tone but it's very hard for me to get into that preacher tone and then also actually preach unless I change to a non-human perspective, or alternatively, I think you could go for an actual you can go from a religious perspective or whatever, especially if it's not an actual religion, if it's your own kind of, combination of faux religious kind of thought. You can kind of, I don't know, Joey always likes to say, you got the guy in the mic has two choices. You can either be you can either do Elvis, which is karate, or you can go preacher man, like Johnny Cash or whatever, and that's the two archetypes, that the singer can inhabit, Anyway, it's a nice theory that we put to test from time to time. Occasionally Joey will say to me, are you doing kung fu, or are you doing, hellfire, And so that's the binary system, which it doesn't rule my world, but it's prevalent enough that you note it. You know what I mean? I suppose there are exceptions to that. Hopefully there are exceptions to that. I don't want to think it's that boxed in. But this song would be definitely a preachy tone at the pulpit, a la Bob Dylan is the best example. I can think of that in popular music. Maybe Johnny Cash or whatever, but more Bob Dylan because he's actually writing the libretto. Johnny Cash, he's utilizing the libretto in a Frank Sinatra kind of way, I suppose, but he actually came up with the thought and the rhyme, So of course we're all deferring to him at this point, And here's my song, here's my proprietary song, but so Super Abound. I forgot it. I was like, "What the hell is that song?" Because I always loved singing that song, but I was trying to think of what the song was, what the hell was it about. It's like, oh yeah, it's Bigfoot. It's not about Bigfoot. It's Bigfoot speaking. Bigfoot is speaking. He's saying, he's been hiding out there in the woods all this time. Everyone can say, oh, he exists. He doesn't exist. We found some fur on a pine cone. He was here. You smell it? He was here. You know what I mean? But we never actually got to hear what he has to say. And so there you go. If you're wondering what Bigfoot had to say, It's right there in
There it is.
superabound. You superabound. All of you humans, you superabound in this, you superabound in that. Unusual word. I like that. I must have got that from the unusual words dictionary. You superabound. You know what I mean? You superabound on this, you superabound on that, but you still got nothing to do. You know what I mean? That's his perspective.
And there was me thinking it was a PT Barnum song.
Well, it does reference PT Barnum, of course, famously. I guess I don't know if it's true, but they would go into the so-called the tent that showed all of the oddities, right? The kind of things, the formaldehyde, kind of, two-headed chickens and things like that. And worse, but as you might imagine, in the turn of the century, whatever, allowed everything, all was allowed. But people would mill around in the tent, and they wouldn't leave. You couldn't figure out how to get them through. So they said, bring me the dictionary of unusual words. Egress this way. Oh, let's go see the egress. And so. Fix the problem. Everyone ran out. They look at the egress. Where's the egress? Oh, let's go. Oh, it's over. I've got. So anyway, I think I referenced a PT in there because I always liked his use of a word that had fallen out of usage. The egress.
Well, that's great, Charles. Thanks so much for talking us through the record.
Yeah, sure.
It was really great fun, and really look forward to.
We could do a plan B if we
year.
need more. If you have the time,
I'm
happy
around.
to figure it out or whatever.
We'll have to work out how to do a different set, some sort of merging of.
We could. Apparently there's a Zoom thing. Of course, we could take advantage of, but we'll talk to the powers that be and see how that works out.
Fabulous. Well, lovely speaking.
Right. Yeah, good to see you, Mark.